so we're going to get started. Welcome to this Four Pees Café. Maybe some housekeeping first. This is a cafe, so you're all muted when you join, but you can unmute yourself and participate if you want to. And as this is likely going to be a shorter cafe, I say that every week, I have the impression, or every time anyway, but as this is likely a shorter cafe, feel free to unmute and ask questions or tell me that I'm wrong, and then we can discuss that. That would be interesting. This is a cafe, so it is also being recorded. I think you got a message about that when you joined. The recordings you can find on our YouTube channel. If you look for Four Pees, there is a playlist on there that has all of the video recordings for the Four Pees cafes. So if you missed anything in the past, like 2 weeks ago, we did something about shapes, I believe, or was there another one in between? Anyway, the last one I did was about shapes in pdfToolbox. If you missed that, you can re-watch it on YouTube. And the advantage is you can fast forward or pause and participate or work along the examples and stuff like that. So this cafe is going to be, again, about pdfToolbox to some extent, and also about pdfChip. The technology I want to talk about, the subject, is decorating PDF documents. And this is something that you can do in pdfToolbox. In a way, you can also do it in pdfChip. And we get quite a few questions on how this works and what the difference is between pdfToolbox and pdfChip. And rightly so, it's a little bit of a gray area. It's not always well understood when you should use what product. And even if you talk to us, even if you talk to me, I would probably need to ask a number of questions before I can tell you what product would be best for a particular use case. So that's the topic of today. Most of you probably know me by now. I haven't looked at the whole list, but I recognize a lot of names always during these cafes. Thanks for that. If you don't know me, I am the CTO at Four Pees, which means I get involved in everything that is technical, difficult, and interesting. That is kind of the summary. I also serve for the Get2 group in a number of different capacities, but that's not the goal of, or the subject for today. The subject for today is this, and this is a term that likely you have not heard before, unless you were present during the original introduction of the custom pre-flight reports in pdfToolbox or the introduction of pdfChip. I want to talk about the underlying technology that allows you to decorate PDF files in pdfToolbox and in pdfChip. And then I want to look very well, in a summarized form at some items for pdfToolbox, and then the same with pdfChip, and that should also tell us when you should use which product. That's the goal of today. And I will show you some stuff in pdfToolbox to show at least where the technology is that we're talking about, where you can find it, and so on. I will show a little bit in pdfChip at least what the template is and what the kind of thing is that you can do with that. But the goal of today is not to show you the technology in all details or to explain how to use it in detail. If you want to know that, so if you already know you want to do something with this decoration technology and you want to have a step-by-step guide on how to create a proof sheet, which is one of the examples I will show for PDF Toolbox today. If you want to do that, there is a video on the Callas YouTube channel. Search for place content, and you know that you have the right video when it starts with a YouTube video of SpaceX failures. That's the one where I used some of the material of SpaceX to get started. But that is a video of about an hour and a half where I explain in detail and step by step how to create one of these templates. That is not my goal today. My goal today is more to talk about positioning. If you want to do that, look for that video. It was recorded during a Callas VIP event, so an introduction of a new software version. And it was the VIP event in Vienna if you want to have an easier time finding it. So what is CChip and why do I have it on here? This is, of course, it sounds very similar to pdfChip, but CChip is the, now comes a very old slide that was, I think, still created by Olaf Drümme, that CEO of Callas. CChip is a technology name, so it's not the product, but it's a technology name, and it stands for, if I remember correctly, Callas HTML on PDF or something like that. Hence the CChip abbreviation. It is the technology that Callas has to, starting from an HTML template, convert that into PDF. And the important, and this is the reason that I put this architectural slide on here, the important thing is that it is built on WebKit. WebKit used to be the engine inside of Safari, for example. This slide says Qt or Qt. There are two types of people, those who say Qt, those who say Qt. It is based on the Qt version of WebKit, and Qt or Qt is a cross-platform development framework that is used very often also in development for integrated electronics, integrated chips, things like the module you have in a coffee maker with all the nice animations that you see while your coffee is being brewed and stuff like that. Yeah. But you can use it, and originally it was developed as a framework across the cross-platform framework that ran on Mac, Windows, and Linux. And so one of the things that they offer is a WebKit-based HTML framework, and that is what Callas uses. So how does this work? Well, you need to create an HTML template, and it is a regular HTML template. WebKit is something that you found, like I said, in Safari, so it handles regular HTML, which means it can use CSS, it can use JavaScript, it can use SVG and a bunch of other stuff. And the Qt WebKit component renders that HTML. And normally in a browser, it would look at the HTML and the CSS and the JavaScript and all the other stuff, and it would convert it into pixels, and those pixels are drawn in your browser. In this case, what Callas does is it uses the part of the engine that converts the HTML and all the other things into a render tree. And the render tree is a tree of objects, the elements that are part of the design. And that render tree, rather than being rendered to pixels, is converted into a PDF document. And they do things a little bit different than a browser. And normally, if you draw text and images and line art and so on in the browser, you would expect that all of that is using RGB colors, and there are a few other things that are typical for browsers and the internet. What Callas did was they made it possible to also get CMYK and ICC-based colors and LAB, and they made it possible to insert metadata, so you can You can create PDFX files out of it, and you have an integration with the barcode engine that is part of pdfToolbox, so you can very easily generate high quality barcodes. So there are a lot of extensions that were added to the HTML language, to the CSS language, and to the JavaScript that you can use inside of these templates. And that makes sure that when you convert this into a PDF, it can be a full production PDF file. Yeah. So you don't have the limitations that you normally have in a browser when it looks at HTML. You can really get something that is decent enough for production and actually perfect for production at the end. The other thing that was changed, and then we're done with this architecture, but the other thing that was changed is that a browser is normally not very optimized. If it generates the same element twice and just generates pixels for it twice, that's usually not the end of the world in a browser. You don't see that as someone who is using Safari necessarily. So it is not really optimized always. If you generate a PDF file, the fact that it is optimized and that you have the minimum number of graphic objects in the file and so on is much more important. And so there is a lot more optimization going on here than you would have in a browser environment. But so in essence, this is a very simple picture. You start from an HTML template and you generate a PDF file. So that is what the CTOolbox technology does. And then the question is, where is this used? I've kept it to pdfToolbox and pdfChip, but I could also have included pdfAPilot, the archival and accessibility-oriented product that Callas has, because that is very similar to pdfToolbox. So where is it used in the Callas products? Well, first of all, it's used in pdfChip. CTOolbox is actually pdfChip if you want. pdfChip is a command line tool that is a wrapper around the CTOolbox technology. And we'll talk about that a little bit more further down the line. And then inside of pdfToolbox, it originally was introduced to create custom pre-flight profiles. Yeah? That is what triggered the development. The question from customers was, how can I make a pre-flight profile that looks exactly the way my customers want? At that point in time, there was only a single predefined PDF report, and you could not modify that. So the question was, how can I modify that? And very simple modifications sometimes, like I don't want the Callas logo to be on there. I want my own logo to be on there. Or because I'm offering services to other printers, I don't want any logo to be on there. Yeah? But the questions were also sometimes much more complex, like I don't like the language that you have in this report. I want to have something that is easier to understand. I don't want my customers to see which fixes were done. I might want to reorder the pre-flight errors that you show in a certain way. Or maybe I want to show some pre-flight errors and others not. And the conclusion at Callas was that if they wanted to offer people a way to create a report, the pre-flight report that they wanted, then they could have created a very simple templating language or something like that, but it would always have been limited. And so instead of doing that, the decision was to use the HTML to PDF technology. And so a PDF, a custom PDF report, still today in pdfToolbox, functions by using an HTML template that is one part, and then that template receives information from the pre-flight system on the pre-flight that was just done, and it generates a PDF file, and that is a PDF report. And because you can modify the template, you can modify the way the PDF report is going to look. And because you're using WebKit, you have access to, like I said, CSS and JavaScript and all these other advanced features. So you can do really cool things in a pre-flight report. That is where it started. In the later version of pdfToolbox, this HTML to PDF technology was also used as a decorator functionality. And that is in the place fix-ups. Place content, place rectangle, place line, place, and there are some exceptions actually, and I have them on the next slide. But all the class of fix-ups that starts with place. If you go to the fix-up list in pdfToolbox and search for that, and I will show that in a second as well, then you find all of them there. So it is used there as well. And then it's also used in the grommets technology, and it is used in the tiling functionality. If you're not in the large format print or design and display market, then grommets is these eyelet marks or grommet marks that you can add to PDF documents. And tiling is when you have something that is too big to print and you're going to cut it up into pieces before it is printed. And these two functionality areas in pdfToolbox internally also use the CTO engine. You can't always see it, but it is still used in the background. Where is it not used? Well, there are other ways in pdfToolbox that you can use to decorate PDF files, to add content on top, for example, or in the background of a PDF file. You have things like the overlay action, you have an add as layer action. Overlay, for example, could be used to add a not for print mark, a watermark on top of the file, or something like that. These actions do not use the CTO engine. They use other technology. If you look at all of these place something fix-ups, there are actually a few of them that have been further optimized and don't necessarily use the internal CTO engine. And they are the simple ones, like place rectangle, place line, place circle. Those have been optimized so that they're quicker and they don't use the whole HTML to PDF technology. There is also a fix-up to outline page geometry boxes. Again, this uses other technology and not CTO. And then shapes, which is another main way that you can add content to existing files. Shapes also uses separate technology and not HTML to PDF. So it is used throughout the product. Don't think that every instance where something is added to a PDF file necessarily uses CTO. There are also exceptions. So let's take a look at pdfToolbox first of all. And in pdfToolbox, it is relatively simple what happens. This is a very simple slide. It is also a very important one that leads to some of the limitations. Yeah. And what this represents is the fact that in pdfToolbox, you have a fix-up, and that fix-up is that thing in the middle. And then what happens in pdfToolbox is always that you have a PDF file as input, the fix-up runs, and that fix-up decorates the PDF. This is why I talk about decorating PDF files. It adds elements to the PDF file. And it's flexible. It can add elements at the top of the Z order, as we say, so at the front of the document, or it could add elements at the back of the document, but it always uses an existing PDF file and it adds stuff to that PDF file. And I want to at least show you what that is. And I'm going to show you two examples, and then those will lead to explaining some of the restrictions as well. So that's why I chose these two. The first is I have a package here. This is a fake package. It's something that I created. It's also wrong. If you would look closely, you'll see some errors in there, but that doesn't matter. What I will do is I will just run this, and you'll see that two things should happen there. So the first thing that happens is that a little bit of additional white space is created on the right-hand side of this document. So basically the media box was enlarged, and then there are color patches that get added to the document. Yeah. And this is completely dynamic. So if I would do this for a different file, then the color patches would reflect the colors that we have in this file. And what I also want to do is I want to go to individual separations. And then we're going to choose one of the Pantone colors. And what you can see is that the color patch for this Pantone color actually uses that particular Pantone color. So these colors that I have at the right-hand side here are not just CMYK colors. They use the exact same separation as what I have in the file. So if I look at gold, this will show me all the gold elements in this document, and the gold patch itself also uses the gold spot color. Yeah. This is done using the place content technology, and you can see that if I open the process plan, it's a very simple process plan. You can see two fix-ups being used. The first one is the one that adds white space to the right of the document, and the second one is the place content one. And if I open this, you can see that yes, this uses place content on page. This is the main CTO technology fix-up in pdfToolbox, and then it works by looking at a folder, and that folder is the templates. This is an HTML template. So if I open the configuration files, and let me see which one is it, add ink information. So this is the folder that we are using, and that has an HTML file, it has a manifest file, some JavaScript, some CSS, and so on. I'm not going to go into more detail than this. Like I said, if you want to know what these templates are and how you best create them, look for this, this video on the YouTube page that explains this whole process step by step. It will tell you where to find a base template that you can use and how to modify it and some of the other important points. But this is the first example that I wanted to show. So this looks at the document. It provides some additional white space on the right-hand side, and then it adds color patches to the document. I will show you one more example, and this is an example that goes a little bit closer to what is also done in this video that I keep referring to, and that is the creation of a proof sheet. And this is a proof sheet that uses variables. So the first thing that I'm going to be asked here is, could you please tell me what the variable values are that need to be used? So that is this. The idea, of course, would be that you integrate this into a larger automation workflow and that the values are delivered through a command line call or from switch metadata that comes with the job from a database or something like that. But so there are a number of variables. I'm not going to change them in this case. And then once the process is completed, you will see that it has created a proof sheet. Again, this uses the place content technology. You recognize perhaps the color patches on the left-hand side. So this is very similar to the first example. It analyzed the file, it figured out which spot colors I had in this file, and it added color patches for each of these spot colors. But then also the variable values have been added in red. There's a nice background, but all of the red values are the ones that comes from these variables. And then what you can also see here is that based on some of this variable information, there is, for example, also an indication of how this label is going to be printed. This is a label example, so you can see that as well. So this is a proof sheet example. Now, if I look at what happens here, you can see that there are a whole bunch of steps. And again, I'm not going to go into details, but this green step that you have here is an imposition step. And then you could wonder, why do I need an imposition step in there? And then it becomes time to look at the restrictions. So let me go back here to my presentation. So I said you have an input PDF file, you run a fix-up, and then you have an output PDF file that is decorated. And in pdfToolbox, the restriction that you have for the place content technology is that it is always the current PDF document that is decorated. You cannot create a new PDF file from scratch. So it's not that this template can be used to create a new file. No, the template is always used to create a bunch of content, PDF content elements, and these are added to the current document. Also, you cannot alter the number of pages. I have an input PDF document. If that input PDF document has 10 pages and I run a place content template, my resulting document is also going to have 10 pages. The only thing I can control in the template, if I want to, is what is the content that is going to be added to those 10 pages. And that content does not need to be the same for each page. So if I want to add page numbers, for example, I can do so. I can have a piece of text on there that would be page 1 of 10 on the first page and page 10 of 10 on the last page. So that is a possibility. I could also decide not to add content on certain pages. I have an example somewhere where only on page 2 there is a barcode added. That is possible. But I cannot alter the number of pages in my input document. I can just add decorations to this document. I can also not modify the page boxes, the size of the PDF. If I have an A4 PDF file as the input PDF, my output PDF is also going to be an A4. I cannot modify that. And now, that is a very strange thing to say because that is what you saw me do. In both of these examples, we actually modify the size of the document. In the first one, there is additional space. In the second one, my original label becomes part of an A4 proof sheet. The key element here is that place content cannot do these things. So if you want to do them, you have to do them in pdfToolbox using different fix-ups. So my first example, I have a fix-up that modifies the media box, and then I run the place content fix-up, and that adds the color patches. In my second example of the proof sheet, I have an imposition step. The imposition step is responsible to taking the original file and placing it on an A4. And then I run place content to add the additional information. This is something, especially if you create something like proof sheets, that you will see over and over again. It's a very efficient way of doing it. You first have imposition that is used to make sure that the document that you have is scaled and is placed in the correct spot on an A4 file, for example, and then a separate action adds the additional variable information. So this is important. These are the restrictions that you have with place content. And if you have if you have a project where you think that you want to use place content, then you would better also have these restrictions in the back of your mind, because if you want to do certain of these things, then you can only do them well, in a different way by using separate fix-ups or actions in pdfToolbox to prepare your document. And if you're a little bit creative with that, there is a lot you can do, but those are the restrictions. The most important restriction, perhaps, is that you cannot create a new PDF file from scratch. So imagine that you have a bunch of data in a database for an order, and what you want to generate is this nice job jacket document that has a preview of the PDF, and then it has a whole bunch of administrative information for this order. Or maybe there isn't even a preview. You just want to have the information from the older database or from the MIS system. That is creating a PDF file from scratch. And so it's no longer decorating a PDF file. And in that case, oh, I should not have done that. In that case, this is why Callas invented pdfChip as a separate product. So pdfChip is a separate, to be very clear, is a totally separate product from pdfToolbox. It does not contain a pre-flight engine or any of the other things that pdfToolbox can do. What it does give you is an interface, a command line interface to the C-chip technology. And so how does the lifecycle look in pdfChip? Well, in pdfChip, you go not from a PDF file to a PDF file, but you go from an HTML template to a PDF file. There is no PDF file at the beginning. There is just an HTML template. And that template is converted into a PDF document. Does that mean that you cannot use PDF files while you're working with this? No, of course not. If you also have PDF documents, then you can use that. Yeah. So I could do something like, before we go there, let me go to my desktop and show you this. This is an HTML template for pdfChip. What I have here is an HTML file, and you can see that this HTML file already displays a background. Yeah. What background? Well, if you would open the HTML in Visual Studio Code or a similar text editor, you would see that it uses this image in the PDF, in the HTML. And this is a PDF file with a poster background image. What is important is that I now also have a little bit of JavaScript that belongs to this. And this JavaScript will generate the output that I am looking for. And so the output in this case, and I have to be a little bit careful, and this might take, no, it doesn't, it's still good. So I have to be a little bit careful because this is the output. And this example actually takes this poster that I had in my HTML. And it also looks at a JSON file with 10,000 different codes. And each page has received an additional QR code. And as you can see, the QR code is different on each page. Yeah. And the reason I said I have to be a little bit careful is because I'm showing you this in preview, and this document has 10,000 pages in total. So if you open this from scratch, it can take a few seconds before this is opened. But so what is important here is that I did not start from a PDF as I would have had to do in pdfToolbox. I started from just having an HTML. And pdfChip is a command line tool. So I essentially just said, told pdfChip to take my HTML template, convert it into a PDF, and then there is a way to also feed it additional data. And in this case, I fed it a JSON file that has these 10,000 codes that I use to generate the QR codes. So the technology is very similar. Obviously, in both cases, you're talking about C-chip technology. So in both cases, you're talking about HTML to PDF conversion. The difference is that in pdfToolbox, you're using it to decorate existing PDF files, and in pdfChip, you use it to create new PDF files. And so what is the difference with pdfToolbox? Well, the templates in pdfChip, the template that I create can actually decide what the page size, the output page size is going to be. And the page size can even be different for every page. If you want an example of that, strangely enough, you can go to pdfToolbox and you can try the tiling functionality. The tiling functionality in pdfToolbox under the hood uses pdfChip. It's a bit of a strange setup, but this was the only way it could be done. And in the tiling engine, each of the tiles that you create can have a different size. And actually, you can also ask for an instruction sheet, and the instruction sheet will always be the first page in that case, and it will always be A4. Yeah? So in pdfChip, you can control the size of the file that you generate. You can also control the number of pages, and the number of pages could be controlled by just giving it a long HTML document and asking it to convert to PDF, and then it would generate a number of pages, that the HTML generates. But I can do also something like what you just saw in this example template, where I have a one-page HTML file, but using a loop, I just repeat it as many times as I need, and each time I modify the content a little bit to add a QR code. So that's another difference with pdfToolbox, where you can never change the number of pages in the input file. Other difference is that I can output a single file or many different files. The example I just showed you starts from a one-page HTML, and it generates a 10,000-page PDF file. If I wanted to, I could have generated 10,000 individual one-page PDF files as well, and I can control the naming of each of them. And then also a very important difference is that pdfChip supports advanced pagination, and this is implemented using a multiple pass technology. What do you need this for? Well, a typical example, we have customers who use pdfChip to generate invoices. So the input is, for example, an XML file or a JSON file that comes out of an accounting system. And they use the technology, they use pdfChip to, on the fly, create PDF invoices from that information. In many cases, you're not going to know ahead of time how many pages the invoice is going to be. Think about the invoice you get for cell phones. It has a call record, for example, and if you call more, then your invoice is going to have more pages, and you're essentially going to be bankrupt trying to pay for it. So if you can't predict ahead of time how many pages the output is going to be, it also becomes very difficult to add things like page numbers, where it says page 1 of 5. Adding a simple page number is easy. Adding something where it says page 1 out of 5 is more difficult, because you have to know how many pages are going to be generated. Yes. pdfChip supports this or solves this by giving you the ability to use multiple templates. A first template would generate all of the main page content. So in the case of your invoice, the first HTML template would look at all of the call information and so on, and it would generate enough pages to keep all of the invoice data. Once that is done, you know how many pages there are. And then the second or the third pass, there are reasons to have 3 passes, but it's too detailed for what we need to know here. But the second or the third step already know that there are 5 pages, and they can use that information to then, for example, add appropriate header and footers where you have page number information and things like that. Okay. This advanced pagination, of course, is something that only exists in pdfChip and that you cannot use in pdfToolbox. And then the last point is performance, if you want, and the fact that, well, pdfToolbox is optimized to work with existing PDF files and do things with that. pdfChip is optimized to generate PDF files from scratch. And so when you start looking at larger documents, and this 10,000-page document was a proof of concept for a project where the number of pages would have ranged between 50,000 and 3 million or something like that. So really PDF files with lots of content in it, and performance becomes really, really important. And what we've seen during testing is that pdfChip is extremely fast in generating this output. I was surprised when I created this proof of concept of how quickly it could generate things. And also that it is quite linear in the way it scales up. And what that means is that if I generate 10,000 pages, or I generate 100,000 pages, well, the 100,000 pages will take about 10 times as long as the 10,000 pages. So it's linear. If the number of pages triples, then the time triples as well. Unfortunately, many processes that you have with software are not linear, but they're more exponential or something that looks like that. So as the number of pages grows, the processing time becomes really, really, really much longer. That is not the case in pdfChip. pdfChip is optimized to the sense that it is as quick as it can be, and it will give you a pretty linear scaling behavior, which in certain projects is absolutely essential. So the performance characteristics are very different than pdfToolbox as well. So that is what I wanted to share with you today. So let me summarize very briefly. We talked about the CTO technology. Remember that that is the underlying technology and that it always uses an HTML template, and that there is a video that shows you how to build one of those step by step. So we talked about the underlying CTO technology. We talked about the fact that this is integrated into pdfToolbox and into pdfChip, and that there are differences in how it is integrated, where pdfToolbox always decorates an existing PDF file, and where pdfChip creates new PDF files from scratch. If you have the question, you or one of your customers has the question on what is the best product to use for a particular use case, what you should keep in mind are these slides with limitations. And specifically that the limitation in pdfToolbox is that it is decoration of an existing PDF. And so changing the number of pages, inventing new pages, changing the page size, or creating something from scratch is not what pdfToolbox was invented for. In that case, you are probably going to be better off with pdfChip. The last thing I will say is that, of course, pdfToolbox can be used on command line as well, and that it has a configurator in Focus Switch that you can use. And the reason I'm saying that is that on the pdfChip side, so if you want to use pdfChip, it is a command line tool. There is no user interface. It is strictly a command line tool, but there is now also, as of a month or so, there is a pdfChip app on the Infocus App Store. So if you want to use pdfChip in a Switch project, in a Switch flow, then go to the Infocus App Store, install the pdfChip app that was created by Callas. It is a free app, and that will allow you to drive pdfChip in Switch. Of course, you will still need a license for pdfChip if you want that to work, but at least you don't have to write a script or, heaven forbid, use the command line tool that no one understands in Switch. So there is an app now, and that will make it much easier. It will also make it easier and give you a very nice way of specifying where the template is, specifying where the data is that you want to use in your template, so where the JSON file comes from with all the data in it. All of that is supported by properties in the app. So that should make it easier to get going with pdfChip in Switch as well. Good, that's it. I said it was going to be short, and at least it is only 45 minutes now, so I did not lie for a change. There are no questions. If there are questions, you have another 30 seconds to enter them, or to unmute yourself and speak to me. While you're doing that, I will advertise a Four Pees Café that takes place next week. And it's a bit of a special one. It's one that we added to the list of cafes. And that one will talk about a new app that we just released on the Infocus App Store. That app is called Buggy. And if you want to know what Buggy is about, then you should watch next week's Café. And I'll give you a hint. If you create switch flows, if you sometimes have to spend time testing them or figuring out what isn't working, or you're just creating very complex flows and you want some support on during the creation process. Yeah. And I think everyone who does that knows what takes the most time in Switch. If that is the case, join next week's cafe and I will show you Buggy. It's a bundle app actually, so it has 3 little applications that you can insert in Switch workflows in different places, and it should make your life a lot easier while you develop these Switch flows. It is not a free app, but I think it is worth every penny. It's something that was born out of internal work we did to make our own life easier while we are doing Switch projects for customers. And we decided it is so cool that we didn't want to keep it to ourselves, but we also wanted to give other people access to it, hence it being published on the App Store. You can already go there and install it. It has a 30-day trial license if you want to try it, so feel free to already look at it. But next week, I will explain in detail what you can do with it. One question. Is there a possibility to generate spot bitmaps with pdfChip? It's actually much worse. There is no possibility to generate bitmaps in general. Maybe I'm misunderstanding what your problem is or what your question is. What you can do is everything that you can do in HTML essentially, and then also what you can do in the extensions that Calas provided for HTML and CSS. Yeah. If you want to know what it is, go to help.calasoftware.com. There is a completely separate manual there for pdfChip. So once again, help.calasoftware.com, or you can go to the Calas Software website and under support, there is an online documentation link that will get you to the same site. Look at the pdfChip manual, and there you will find all the extensions to what is possible. But in essence, anything that you can do in HTML, you will also be able to do in using pdfChip. And things like spot colors are supported. Whether you could use a grayscale image and assign a spot to it, I have my doubts, but I have not tried it, Sergey. So it is something that would need to be tested. It's a good question. I don't think I've heard that question. Maybe there is someone else from support here who could add to it, but I don't remember the question. And most pdfChip questions somehow find their way to me. But something that needs to be tested. I know that it is possible to use spot color. You can even have SVG content, for example, and then use spot colors in the SVG. That is something that we have tested. Whether you could use it to colorize a bitmap image, a grayscale image, I am not certain. So to be tested. You can actually, and that is maybe worthwhile saying, in HTML, normally you would expect to use JPEGs or PNGs as images. In pdfChip, I can also use PDF files. So if you use image tags in HTML, I can specify for an image tag, I can specify that the source is actually a PDF file. I can even specify what page it is. I can specify which portion of the trim box, for example, I want to use. So that is a possibility. And that means that, let's say that you want to generate invoices and the invoices need to have a logo on it. Well, you have a choice then. You can have an RGB version of the logo that is added to the generated PDF invoice, but you could also use a PDF version of the logo. And if that PDF file contains spot color, if it contains any kind of other advanced things like transparency or anything like that, then those will be will be part of the generated invoice at the end. Yeah. So if you specify a PDF file, that will be placed as an image in your generated PDF file, but it is not rasterized. So if the PDF file contains vector elements, your PDF will contain the generated PDF will contain the same vector elements. The content is simply copied from the input file to the output file. So if you would have colorized bitmaps in the PDF file that you place in a template, then yes, that would also end up in your output document. That is one thing that I am certain is working. Okay, that's it from my side. I thank you very much for joining this cafe, and I hope I will see many of you next week when we will talk about Buggy and how to make it easier, less painful to create complicated switch workflows and to test them and debug them. Till next week, perhaps, and have a great rest of the day. Bye.